Welcome back. With Flappy the Mutton Muncher defeated, my path forward is simple. Mending, runes, bubbles. In that order, and in quantities sufficient to choke a Cyclops. My mending options are pretty strictly limited right now. I can either farm guardians and hope I get lucky, loot dungeons and hope I don't turn up tulips instead, or get a disenchanting table and work some magic with that. Since I need a disenchantment table anyway, I opt to go this route, and head out to explore the oceans at Mach 3 in search of bookworms. My Dragon's Eye, in addition to granting passive fire and heat resistance, also grants me a toggleable ability that is essentially discount X-ray, and will allow me to locate all manner of ores and blocks in a relatively short AoE around myself. By turning this on and toggling it to detect oak chests, I can sometimes use this to spot things that are hidden behind false walls, though admittedly the utility is somewhat limited by the fact that I know where all the chests can spawn already anyway. Apparently, villages falling out of the sky is fairly common around here, because another one falls in and cracks a Cyclops' house in half while I'm lining up to try and take it out. The Cyclops itself is worthless, but the chests might be able to spawn mimics, since they sometimes spawn with dungeon loot. Hypothermia is, of course, making itself known again. It turns out that swimming in the middle of an open ocean at midnight has deleterious effects on one's core temperature. Whiners. The hypothermia is absolutely infuriating, of course, but there isn't really anything I can do about it right now. I do have a tier 5 ice dragon skull from a lucky corpse find that I could make into the ice variant of an eye, and this would negate the problem entirely, but I don't have enough diamonds for that, and I'm also too low on slime to make better Aussie liner setups. Had I been smart, I would have made an extra warm Aussie liner originally, but such is life. Nothing for it but to loot my way across the 7 seas in search of shiny blue rocks or slime, whichever comes first. Of course, diamonds are about as common as dirt in this mod pack, so getting those materials ends up being a simple matter of cracking open the back end of a random set piece and looting the hid compartment. This is very quickly turned into an ice variant of the eye, and I am more than willing to swap these suckers out every time I start getting too chilly, so that solves that problem for good. My attempts to loot a battle tower are interrupted by an angry Lycanite water dragon that decides I look like lunch. I decide it looks like lunch, but sadly it turns out the thing was just skin and bones, which is a shame. The battle tower goes down without a fight, obviously. I chance upon a mending book in a village library shortly after. This book is enchanted with a bunch of other things too, which would normally make it use for applying to a weapon without some refinement, but since none of them apply to armor, it's actually a perfectly serviceable book for what I have in mind. After warping home to craft up a pair of boots with the appropriate enchanted boots, I move on with my life. Fun fact, the movement speed increase granted by my sea stone, and combined with Depth Strider, is so fast that it actually bugs out in lava and forces you to move backwards. This is deeply annoying to deal with and ends up being a surprisingly huge liability when you're interacting with lava-rich areas, or mobs that can spray out lava blocks, since if you touch one of those, your movement goes haywire. The solution is to install a functionally identical version of Depth Strider called Underwater Strider, which I have a book for, courtesy of the Guardian farm. It's a modded enchantment that does the exact same thing, but only when you're submerged fully in water or lava, and it is slightly less buggy. I have no idea why such a redundant enchantment exists, but I'm grateful that it does, because otherwise navigating the Nether would turn into a slapstick comedy routine. I'm short on unbreaking for the boots still, but I decide to go ahead and use them anyway. Mending will keep them intact enough, even if it's not the advanced variant, and unbreaking books are pretty easy to get from any number of sources, so I'm not terribly concerned about this being a long-term problem. Another day, another battle tower, complete with another village falling out of the sky and deleting half of it, though at least this village was considerate enough to leave the loot chests. I'm beginning to suspect that the spawn rate for these things is just a tad bit overtuned. In another tower, this time without belly-flopping an ocean village nearby, I find a fishing rod enchanted with the Curse of Possession. This is not actually a bad thing, for reasons described earlier, so I grab it and make a note to snag any other fishing rods I find from dungeon loot. You can't craft them naturally, but you can enchant them, and it may be possible for me to do some shenanigans that will let me steal the curse and put it on my own stuff. Free water lizard! Get your free water lizard right— oh, shut up, you stupid groupies. Someone needs to do something about the population of these things. This is like the third one in a 5-minute stretch of swimming that I have seen. Oh hey, it's a mimic! What are you gonna give me? What stupidly overpowered trinket do you have, my lovely little chesticle? Oh. Increased knockback. On a ring slot. Yeah, I'm gonna go with no thank you. Oh look, a vanilla dungeon. How could I have possibly guessed? I find another desert. Or, more accurately, rediscover one already known about. Since it's a desert, and deserts spawn husks, I spend a night hoping to get lucky, and get a bauble drop from the things. This is not successful, but I do find a sea serpent stuck in a tree, which is really quite disturbingly common when you remember that the things are supposed to live in the ocean. For those of you who are wondering, yes, the swim speed buff from eating cooked Ika meat does stack with all of my other water-based shenanigans. I tend to avoid eating this stuff because I end up moving so quickly I risk killing myself from collision damage, but it is an option that is available to me if ever I feel like I'm moving too slowly. It's a nice attic you have here. Makes me wonder how it was advertised in IKEA. Steel this style, dark-stained oak flooring, open concept, natural lighting, 3 dozen buried corpses, starting at $12.99.99. Just doesn't really have the ring to it. My second night racing around the desert eventually nets me a forbidden fruit trinket. On its own, this thing is basically useless, but it is a crafting item for the Ankh charm, so I need to get at least one of them at some point. So, fun fact that I just discovered, Dragonfire triggers thorns and damages the dragon. Makes sense, it's a ranged attack, and skeleton arrows do the same thing. Only problem with that is, because I've equipped my ice resistance charm, I am immune to Dragonfire. Despite this dragon has been quite happily committing auto-die by attacking me. I literally don't even have to fight the things anymore, they just do themselves in my presence. Truly, I am the most superior Skyrat elimination agent. It does do a number on the armor, though. Mending book number 5 comes from another lucky set-piece loot chest, along with enough stuff to get protection 4, putting me firmly in the category of well stacked up. All I need to do before I can get serious about dungeon looting now is get a disenchantment table and some time in the Guardian farm to finish up my weapons and armor. Unfortunately for me, I still don't have any unbreaking, so the pants continue to be marginally more breakable than the rest of the set. As with the boots, I don't anticipate this being a problem. So, it's now 8 hours later. Not joking. Actually 8 hours, probably closer to 9. I have not found a single defiled biome. Not even talking about bookworms, I've just straight up not found any of the biomes that they can spawn in. And Lycanite seems to be operating under the impression that I am not fireproof. Nice try, Lycanites, but joke's on you, I actually need blaze rods. Anyway, swimming around and looking for the stupid things is not working. I'm going to need a different option. There are several ways of getting some form of reliable flight in RLCraft. Most of them rely on obtaining some sort of Lycanite mount, which, while possible, is a tad bit of a massive pain in the butt. Of the 3 that don't, the first involves creating potions from a drop from a rare mob that spawns only in a rare flower forest biome, and a tad bit of random mushroom from the nether, a dimension tasked with the express purpose of turning me into KFC in about 5 seconds flat. No thanks. The second requires magical rings of power only obtained in the Lost Cities, a dimension tasked with the express purpose of turning me into mildly radioactive chicken skewers in about 0.5 femtoseconds. Extra no thanks with a side of Are You Crazy? The third is sky rats. Specifically, making more of them, and then gaslighting them into thinking that I'm their mother. Great! I can't see any reasons why this would be a terrible idea, so I crank up some fire, set the eggs that I've picked up in it, and wait. 6 minutes later, and I'm now the proud owner of 2 lovely little lizards. They are both female, sadly, so I can't breed them for infinite baby dragons, but that is fine. Feeding one of these suckers is going to be hard enough as it is. Dragons, as I'm sure you are no doubt aware, given the previous episode, eat meat. Lots and lots of meat. Given who their mother is, I would expect these two to not deviate from that pattern all that much, so in order to feed Tweedledee and Tweedledum here, I'm going to need a small mountain of meat and bones to craft into meals. Truly, however, will I handle this terrible problem? I learned 2 things today while out on my meat hunt. The first is that mimics can spawn from locked chests. The second is that I'm blessed by RNGesus himself, because this mimic drops quite possibly the single most desperately needed relic in the game. Oh, and the library just casually had 2 more mending books in it because sure, why not? Anyway, the antidote vessel is an item that, when equipped, reduces the maximum severity of all negative status effects to 2. In the Lost Cities, a great many of the mobs have debilitating, Lycanite-level bogus status effects that are basically impossible to deal with and stack up really high, and they automatically apply whenever you get too close to the mob. Some of those statuses include things like damage received multipliers and action prevention effects that keep you from doing basically anything. This vessel mitigates these effects enough that instead of the usual solution of wearing silver armor and hope you don't get hit once, I can now skip the tinfoil suit strategy and wear actual armor. Given how easy it is to get spotted and the relative non-existent protection value of silver armor, this would be straight up a hard requirement for my run, and I would have had to farm out chests until I've gotten it. Because I have a spare, one of the mending books gets immediately stuck onto an enchanted medkit. This does exactly what you think it does. Infinite healing for XP, anyone? Nearby stray spawners also give me a ring of overclocking when I'm farming bones. This is yet another component to the Ankh charm that I need, so into the horde. After spending a few hours conducting what I can only describe as a tactical extinction event on any mob in line of sight that drops edible meat or bones, I amass enough dragon meals that I can grow my brand new scaly offspring to her full size. She's a big girl. A very, very big girl. So big, in fact, that flying on top of them is something of an art form because they are so large it is nearly impossible to do anything with any level of reliability. This is fine, though, because why should I have to do such menial things as attack mobs myself when I have an infuriated, extremely scaly lizard who wants to immolate everything around her? Even better, they can wear armor. I have no idea how much defense it gives them, assuming it does anything at all, but even a marginal improvement is going to make quite a difference in effective HP, given that this sucker has 1,000 health. So, I have a flying, fire-breathing tank that I can carry around in my pocket. Now what? Well, now I climb on my flying, fire-breathing tank, ascend above the build limit, and set down something on my W key for an hour or so while I go do something more productive with my time. Dragons aren't exactly fast, but they are fast enough to outrun anything that would spawn up here, and I can go back and check my atlas for defiled biomes later, so hopefully this will see some better results than ocean travel. That said, this method is not without flaws. Case in point, what I think is an interesting looking biome ends up just being a village full of, literally hundreds of lampposts? What the heck? Villagers, my dudes, we need to talk about your zoning requirements. This strategy ends up working like a charm though, and it finds me a defiled biome in 5 minutes. Because of course it does. Welcome to the Defiled Lands. This biome is utterly useless to me because it doesn't spawn any bookworms. Oh well, back on Flappy 2 Serpentine Boogaloo I go. Attempt number 2 is also another strike. Biome number 3 next door is a hit though, and I have visual confirmation on some bookworms pretty quickly. Unfortunately, there's an angry frost dragon that seems intent on informing me that I am not welcome to set up shop here. I resent this and respond by beating her over the head with some nunchucks until she falls asleep. Operation Breed Bookworms Until Rich immediately kicks off by me making a nice big hole in the ground and rounding up every bookworm in the area and shoving them into it. Bookworms normally are bred using foul candy, an appropriately named mix of random mushroom powder, slime dropped from mobs that spawn in the biomes, and sugar. I have next to zero sugar and even less desire to try and farm some, so I'm going to go with an unintended option B, which is just spamming love potion AoE arrows in their general vicinity. This will cause a runaway population explosion, and my working theory is I can keep doing this until I get enough golden ones to kill for scales. This plan is going great until I accidentally hit a local bookworm with a snowball during the construction phase, at which point the whole pod gets angry and forces me to kill them. Excellent start. Once the rest of the locals are in their brand new breeding bunker, I round them all up and drop a few arrows at my feet. Exponential growth, begin. After a good hour of this, I finally get my first golden worm. To be safe, I'm going to probably want around half a dozen of the things before I start culling the non-golden herd, but this is progress. And besides, it's not like I don't have infinite love arrows or anything. For those who are wondering, golden worms breed more golden worms at a higher likelihood, and this increase in likelihood is pretty substantial, but as long as I'm not losing worms to entity cramming, there's no sense in not breeding the regular ones and hoping to get lucky, so I keep them around for a little bit. And after about another half hour, I am sitting on 6-ish golden worms, which means it's time to clean out the ones that I don't want loot from. This means I need some way of removing the rest of the worms without them aggroing on me. Sadly, since I left my pit bull back at home, I have to make do with a bucket of lava. Alrighty. Yeah, y'all are not gonna like what happens next, but we do a little stabbing, and just like that, golden worm scales. So, now we get into the fun part. My armor set and shield is not finalized yet, but this is the weapon that I'm going to be taking into the endgame. How do I make it as stupidly overpowered as humanly possible? There are a not insignificant number of guides out there claiming to make the air quote, most overpowered RLCraft build ever, but most of those guides are outdated, pure undiluted dog water, or being belted out by overly opinionated squeakers who can't be bothered to do their actual real-life homework, much less research the game itself. So, I'm stuck doing it my way, as usual. First things first, how do you stick a dozen enchantments on an item without requiring New Horizons levels of XP production? RLCraft adjusts the maximum XP cap on anvils, by which I mean it beats it with a hammer until it gives up and dies, but that doesn't help you if every new enchantment needs 500 levels. This part is easy, but requires you to understand how XP cost increases on an anvil. The too long don't read version is every time you modify an item on an anvil, the cost of the next modification goes up. When you combine items, the cost modifier from the two combining items is selected from the highest of the two combined, and then applied to the final product. This modifier is where most of the cost comes from, so we want it as low as possible. The solution here is to use our good friend the power of logarithms. Take all your books and your item, combine them all into sets of 2. This means each item has been modified at most once, but you have also halved the number of items that you need to work with. Combine them again into sets of 4. Modifications count is still at 2, but now we are at a quarter of the items, then again into 8, and again into 16, etc. The difference this makes is massive. For comparison, a sharpness 5 sword that has been worked only once needs 4 levels to put unbreaking on it. A sword that has been worked 5 times needs 34. This mechanic has an interesting interaction with disenchanters. My 2 swords both have sharpness 5, but one of them has a much higher working penalty. If I only care about the enchantment, this means that I can use a trash sword to stack enchanted books on, disenchant the sword, and then get an enchanted book back that has no working penalty at all. This becomes very important when you're trying to isolate rare or highly leveled enchantments, since you can exploit this to reset all of the penalties and still have your endgame tier enchantment. Great, we know how to enchant. Now how do we design a build and a weapon with that? First things first, damage per second, i.e. DPS, can be simplified into a simple equation of how much damage you do multiplied by how many times you do it in a second. We want that number to be as big as possible, which yes, I know is reductive, but whatever, just roll with it. The problem with that is that DPS is very sensitive to buff ordering, and determining what the buff actually applies to is a flipping nightmare. Take this example. I have here a regular diamond sword and a supreme sharpness diamond sword. The regular sword does 7 damage. The supreme sharpness one does 19, 12 from the enchantment and 7 from the base weapon damage. I also have a set of Bezoars with the menacing trait, giving me an additional 8% attack damage for each Bezoar. Bauble effects are multiplicative, not additive. That means that when I equip them, I don't get 1.08 times 7% damage increase of 56%. I instead get a 1.08 to the 7th power increase of damage at about 71%, meaning that an unenchanted diamond sword should go up from doing 7 damage to doing almost exactly 12. This difference isn't huge, but it is an extra half heart, which would throw the math off, so if you're running any numbers, make sure you account for this. 7 times 1.71 is almost 12, so that number checks out. But my Supreme Sharpness sword only does about 24. What gives? Simple. Baubles ignore most other damage buffs when they calculate how much extra damage to give you, and they only buff your outgoing damage. After quite a lot of testing, I determined that bountiful baubles that give damage multipliers only pay attention to the base damage of your weapon, and the quality modifier on the weapon and damage modifying potion stats like strength or weakness. They entirely ignore weapon enchantments, Spartan weapon bonuses, and ice and fire weapon bonuses such as, for example, non-arthropod damage on Myrmix weapons. This makes menacing damage buffs and the Phalus Claw quite weapon dependent, and they are usually worse than a full set of violent baubles as long as you are not hitting faster than the damage cooldown on a mob. And unless you're using a war axe, anywhere from 50 to 90% of your damage is probably going to come from sources that are not buffed by these effects. But wait, it gets worse. Zat has an item called a Potion Stone. It gives you a passive effect that says you deal 40% more damage to poisoned entities. If it worked like the Bountiful Bauble one does, this would ignore any and all enchantment modifiers on your weapon, right? Except it doesn't. It gives you a 40% damage output increase that stacks with weapon quality, and the enchantments on the weapon, and the damage buffs you get from Bountiful Baubles when an enemy is poisoned, but it still ignores the Spartan weapon bonus, Ice and Fire weapon bonus, and seems to mostly, but not entirely, ignore strength effects, though the numbers start getting squirrely there, so I suspect there's some jank in the code that I just am not accounting for. Normally, when designing a build, you would have to balance every single damage modifying interaction like this out. I don't have that problem, because every bauble modifier is earmarked for giving me more health and making me be more tankier, and that means that I do not have space for Poison Stone or Strength Rings on the final build anyway, and certainly won't be spending rolls getting the Menacing trait. This simplifies my DPS equation quite a lot, taking it from hell on earth to essentially a question of how stacked I can make my weapon. First question, what weapon do I want to use? Flat damage buffs like strength and sharpness won't scale with the weapon's attack power, and because base damage is very quickly eclipsed by those flat buffs, I essentially want something that attacks as fast as possible. Normally, this would cap out at a certain point because a mob's damage cooldown would prevent me from hitting it, but there's an enchantment for that. The fastest attacking weapon is by far a pair of nunchucks, so I tend to gravitate towards those. After going through an extensive laundry list of nonsense enchantments, I end up with a definite list of 14 enchantments that I want, and a candidate list of another 14, depending on what conflicts with what. My 10 for sure picks are Curse of Possession, so I can't drop my weapon, Mending and Unbreaking for obvious reasons, Luck Magnification for luck effect when I hold the weapon, which conflicts, so I end up switching it out later, Education for bonus XP, which sadly conflicts with Adept, but Education is slightly better for trash mobs, so I went with that one. Arc Slash, as a simply better type of sweeping edge. Combo for faster spin-up time on my nunchucks. Fiery Edge for bypassing damage cooldown on mobs that are on fire. Swifter Slashes for more attack speed. Parry for a damage mitigation passive effect. And the Penetration and Piercing capabilities enchantments to break through armor. I have no idea if they stack, but they don't conflict with anything, so on they go. The rest of the enchantments are a little bit more up in the air. After doing way more code reading than I had any reason to, it turns out that Reviled Blade conflicts with Swifter Slashes, Ash Destroyer conflicts with Fiery Edge, the Weather and Time enchantments can actually debuff your weapon if you don't meet their criteria, Mortalitas conflicts with Critical Strike and Viper, Dark Shadows conflicts with Viper and is absolutely just worse, and this is where I discover that Luck Magnification conflicts with Critical Strike, which means I need to recombine my Flaming Nunchucks with one with Critical Strike on it to switch that enchantment out in my survival world. All this to say, I'm going to go with adding on Subject Science for slightly more damage plus IFF-enabled explosions, Atomic Deconstructor, giving me a 1 in 500 chance of instantly killing, or more accurately just doing a lot of damage to an enemy with each hit, Supreme Sharpness, because duh, Unreasonable, because friendly fire is good, I guess, and it doesn't conflict with anything. Critical Strike, once I switch it out. Envenomed, and Viper. When combined with the passives from Level Up and a Strength Potion effect, the damage output becomes concerning, especially taking into account that this is armor-penetrating damage. If I were able to add a Poison Stone and damage multipliers, it would be even more ridiculous, but sadly we must make that sacrifice in the name of becoming an uber tank. Back in the real world, conveniently enough, I have quite a few of the books I need already. As for the rest, well, get in, losers, we're going shopping. Finishing my enchantment set is shockingly not very much work at all once you have a guardian farm. A lot of these enchantments can just be farmed by spam enchanting random throwaway weapons and combining the disenchanted books, and of those that can't, the only one that is super tricky to get, i.e. Supreme Sharpness, is one that I had 2 max level drops for within the first hour of grinding, so life is pretty good. Another hour or 2 and 18,000 guardians later, and I have basically everything I need. My Viper enchantment is 1 level off, but that shouldn't make too much of a difference in terms of its nominal damage output, and the thing is going to be one-shotting just about everything anyway, so I don't really care. The first step is swapping out the Luck Magnification enchantment for Critical Strike, which only takes 137 levels. Yay. Another cheeky 2,000 more guardians, and I'm able to place my final enchantment on the nunchucks, the Curse of Possession. And just like that, it's done. Let's go take it for a spin, shall we? Before we do that, though, I was rooting around in my chest looking for stuff to upgrade a pickaxe. I got what I needed, but I also found a convenient random Viper 4 book that I can use to put on the final upgrade for my nunchucks. With that out of the way, now I can take it for a spin. Welcome to the power creep portion of the episode. In case you haven't been paying attention until this point, I'm flipping stacked, and my goal now is to get even more stacked because this isn't even enough to pretend that I can survive combat in the Lost Cities. My to-do checklist is getting shorter, though, so it wouldn't surprise me if I was starting to nose around the idea in a couple of episodes. Next on my list are baubles, specifically the Ankh Charm, which negates all negative vanilla potion effects, and when combined with a shield, lets me use it without taking up an armor slot. Since I'm going to want shield for passive blocking anyway, this is basically the only acceptable endgame option for my shield space. As a general rule, the Ankh Shield requires you to access the End Dimension to get the Shulker Heart and Dragon Scales for its creation. With Doom-like dungeons, however, there is a chance for all sorts of interesting loot that breaks these rules, and Shulker Hearts and Dragon Scales will spawn in the higher tier loot chests. This is why I'm currently bulldozering my way through a dungeon with zero regard for XP or loot. I straight up don't care at this point. All I want are baubles to either wear or break down for silt into rerolling, record discs in case I need them for rune crafting recipes, stuff for glowing ingots for rerolling baubles, and maybe looking at gear that I can disenchant. The rest of this is just shiny garbage. Elder Guardians have a 100% drop for vitamins, by the way, which makes them great for farming out silt if you need a large quantity of it. My nunchucks passively give me so much health sustain that I straight up don't even notice that I'm being attacked by a sea serpent here. I then realize this, take mild defense, and then smack it in the face 4 times until it falls over. Honestly, after the first dungeon is bobbled out, I don't even bother collecting the stuff for spectral silt, since I'm only going to need to reroll a couple more baubles with it at this point. Dungeon crawling just quickly turns into me cracking open the largest rooms with the best loot, checking the chests for one of a small handful of useful items, and smacking mobs if I need to get them off my back, and then bailing at the soonest possible opportunity. Calling it dungeon crawling at this point kind of isn't even correct. It's more like a large quantity of dungeons suddenly became victims in a chronic string of hit-and-run accidents perpetuated by a coked-up waterfowl in designer leather attempting to fulfill their crippling addiction to costume jewelry. My well-paying vehicular manslaughter bender is put to pause after a couple hours by me accidentally tripping over another dragon nest. Unlike with Flappy, I'm actually prepared to fight these things head-on, and this one has made the incredibly poor choice of building its nest within 5 miles of an ocean biome, so it is not likely to escape. I go in fully loaded to bear, with 4 stacks of diamond-tipped arrows, intending to burn this thing down before it can even surface. I open fire, and it dies in 2 shots. Yeah. My working theory is that it got squished inside the wall of a dungeon that formed in its den, and it was shoved out right before it died, but this was the most anticlimactic dragon fight of all time. I got another free egg from it, though, so that's nice. At this point, it is abundantly clear to me that while I could, in principle, get all the stuff I want from Doom-like dungeons, it's gonna take way more time than I care to waste on it. So, there's no way around it. I need to go to the end. And for the end, I need flight potions. And for flight potions, I need to go to the Nether. I was hoping to avoid this, but what can you do? That said, just because I need to go to the Nether doesn't mean I need to stay long. All I need are some fancy bone mushrooms, and while yeah, those might take a bit, I can just spam out Nether portals all across the world until I get a lucky spawn right next to them. Or, as the case may be, spam out one portal, race across a little bit of a plateau, gather some mushrooms, smash together a second portal, and jump back into the overworld in exactly 63 seconds. Barring a death, this is the total extent of the time I plan on spending in the Nether until I am ready to push for endgame. The next, and last, ingredient is more problematic. I need pixie dust. And no, ice and fire pixie dust doesn't count, though I do depopulate a village of those for later. I need familiar fauna pixie dust. Familiar fauna pixies spawn in exactly one location, a flower forest biome, one of the rarest biome types in the game. Unlike the defiled biome, it also overlaps with a meadow biome on the atlas, so I can't even go AFK on Lizard Air and get a reliable beat on the location of one by reading the atlas after the fact. I have checked every biome with a flower forest texture in my atlas, and they were all meadows, so there is nothing for it but to hop on to the taxi with a compass and get searching. Surely this won't take long. I discovered many wondrous things on my journey. I saw jungle myrmexes with some serious compensation problems. I discovered that attempting to raise my render limit above 24 chunks causes my dragon to rubber band worse than a 2015-era modded Minecraft server hosted on a cucumber. I discovered whatever monument to compensation this thing is. Seriously. Who has the budget for this in RLCraft? Good grief. And, after a good hour of flying around, I discover a flower forest. Naturally, because I'm me, I immediately begin burning the place to the ground. Pixies are hard to spot, and the forest is rather tricky to navigate with all of the trees and stuff, so let's just turn the whole place into a burned out wasteland and solve two problems with one stone. I then get started on running around like a lunatic, beating up pixies with a pair of nunchucks strong enough to serve as a nuclear deterrent. I think there may be something wrong with me. Regardless, while I'm doing that, I'm going to let you good folks do whatever it is that you do while you watch these videos, and will bid you farewell for today. Thank you for your time, and if you are inclined to that sort of thing, consider doing all the algorithm happy making down below. And, as always, I hope you enjoyed.